driver than he is the camera.
Hey, we got Brad Dixon and Trent Dixon with us today. So glad you guys can make it in there. Billy is flying on an airplane, hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully he's still in there. And
Hopefully he doesn't detour over to Tel Aviv
right.
or any of those little other places over there. You
Yeah.
can kind of skirt around all the nonsense.
Man, yeah.
You know.
So I don't think we'll be hearing from him. You guys are welcome to comment and whatever. I'd actually thought about having a live call-in guest, getting a hold of my buddy Chris Kearns. I don't know if you know him, but he promotes the Wild West Shootout.
Okay, gotcha.
And because we just, in making notes, we talked about getting young kids into the sport. Chris gets a lot of trophies from me, but he always buys a kid's version of the trophies.
Nice.
Like every night of the Wild West Shootout, every main event, there's an honorary main event winner that comes out of the crowd, and just he takes a lot of time to keep the kids involved in stuff like that, you know. And he was also, he's in Bakersfield, been like, would go on Sundays and promote go-kart and mini dwarf racing and all that stuff. Yeah, he tries to get all that, because you have, as we're talking about, you have to have a pool to draw out of.
Absolutely. In fact, I saw it it was a neat idea, because dirt tracks are usually only used on Saturday. Well, 105, I thought it was a really neat deal. They are actually having a kids summer camp at the track, where the kids come every day for a week, a kids summer camp at the track, and they're going to do different things. And I thought that was actually a pretty neat deal.
That would be pretty awesome. And I mean, now you got me thinking out loud, but there's, you know, I see guys on social media that are teaching young men how to tie ties and all that, because they don't have that.
Right.
And
well, I'm a clip-on guy too.
And I couldn't do it. If
my wife can do it for me. Hey, tie this.
I couldn't do it, but yeah, there is room for a camp like that, and even with light automotive, how to put jumper cables on properly, how to change a tire, how to jack your car up safely,
right,
and stuff like that. So yeah, there would be. Yeah. I mean, there's a vast amount of things that anybody could do, but
and it's tough, because the kids, you know, Trent, of course, he has me, and there's a lot of kids that come from broken homes.
Yes.
And, you know, mama does all she can do.
Right.
But then there's a flip side. As things are evolving, even the kids that aren't out of broken homes, the dads, I guess, get as many manicures as the mom does now. And I guess, you know, to each his own, but the men aren't swinging hammers like they used to. When I grew up, every Saturday morning, there was a pair of red ramps in the driveway, and you could spot the old orange Fram oil filter and usually the yellow Pennzoil bottles.
Right.
You know, I actually remember my grandpa had the can where you had to take the little deal and poke the triangle, clip it with the metal deal, you know. But these kids are growing up in a different era, and I believe we are going to start to see, if we don't try to like figure a new way of understanding the kids, to understand what would get their attention at the dirt track. Yeah. Like, you know,
both my kids have raced the mini dwarfs, which had a 6 horsepower Honda, and, you know, little cage, whatever. The pretty simple little car, go-kart with a cage on it. And neither one of them, it really wasn't their thing. My daughter was timid. We were laughing. Some of them are coming back up on a thing called realfast.tv. Okay. And they were like focused on her for about a lap, and so I shared it, and she was like, you know, that really felt like I was going way faster than that back then. And then my son was kind of the same way. We would go test and whatever, and he was good by himself, but in traffic he was a little bit timid. But I really enjoyed I'm glad they both got to drive those and got some situational awareness, got in some small wrecks and things like that right off the bat, And then, but those cars also, they just started to creep out of hand. They started getting, we were on, I built theirs with a lot of Tractor Supply parts. You can go there and get the clutches, and that's what they were at first. And then by the end, they were like the outlaw cart cages that kind of flexed on there and had the springs and all of that kind of stuff, and it just, and I don't know how you stop that, but the winners want to keep pushing to win, and
and we ran into that. Trent can probably tell you. So he started off with, he had a little yard cart in the yard, and at first I had him a go-kart, and it just sat there. How long did it? Hang on, I have to share the mic. How long did it sit there, Trent?
Well, we got it whenever I was 2, right? And I started kind of racing when I was 4, so it probably sat there a year and a half, 2 years.
Why did it sit there? What did you do that started your racing career? Because this is actually a funny story.
Well, probably little me, I waddled out there in my underwear, and I just started turning wrenches, and I ended up taking the motor off of it. And I mean, I had no idea what I was doing, but
I told him, I said, hey, if you want to race this thing, you got to work on it.
Yeah.
And he came out in the shop one day and says, okay, I want to work on it. So he actually started working on it, and he got the little motor off of it, and then we got it going. But this is the part that kind of is funny. I had a track in the front yard, and he would spin out, and he would stall it. The clutch was dirty. We didn't have a whole lot of money in it. So it would always stall, and I'd have to go out there and restart it and get him going again. And then I got tired of it. So I'll let you tell them what I did to you.
So the track, it was in between 2 oak trees, and they would always drop acorns. And he would sweep or rake all the acorns onto the track, and he said, if you spin out again, you're putting it up. So eventually I just learned how to keep it under control without spinning out, and I'd be out there for hours at a time.
But the first few days were rough, because he would go down the straightaway, spin it out, put it up. It was tears. I was like, I was like, oh man, this is gonna be a long night. It's kind of like when you ground a kid. Sometimes you're grounding yourself.
Right? Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
It's a tough.
Yeah.
But he got that go-kart going, and his buddy William Calebson, they actually live next door. So William and his dad had 2 go-karts, and they wore them things out. But the best time, I look out, and Trent goes into the corner, and he hits this little rut, and he barrel rolls it. Well, it lands on his wheels. He doesn't even look at me. He just gasses it and keeps going, because I think he thought, well, if I flip this thing and my dad's going to run it, I'm going to act like it never happened so I can keep riding. So that was some good stuff.
Heck yeah. And I mean, that's cool stuff. And,
absolutely.
But that's another thing. I don't have a go-kart track out in the front, or I could have one in the back, but the neighbors are going to complain, and stuff like that. Just having a place to go do things like that.
And we raced karts, and then they said, this kart isn't quite what we wanted for the spirit of the rules, and I get that, So I actually built a kart track at my place down there. It was Riverside Raceway, and we had the stock Predator motors, and you could do a few things to them, but like you said, where does it end?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like you look at baseball. He had an unfortunate little, I guess, career in baseball. He wanted to be the pitcher. So I set up a ladder, and I told him, pitch it through the rung of the ladder. And he was really good at pitching. And when it came time to tryouts, because these kids had already played select ball together, they already had their pitcher. Right. And he was by far the better pitcher. So I say that because the parents have a tendency to ruin things for the kiddos.
Right.
And so when a kid has, what were those super good bats that everybody was using, DeMarinis or whatever, they had these bats that, I mean, were just extremely high dollar.
Right.
So when you have a kid that doesn't hit as far, sometimes he's automatically, well, I need that bat.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe you need to work out a little bit more.
Right.
But then, so the kid does work out more and he still doesn't hit it as far. Well, is it the bat? Is it the kid?
Yep.
Well, that is spilling over into car racing.
Sure.
I mean, Trent can tell you, you know, he's been very fortunate. He drove for Dacus Motorsports in the mini sprint and has had some pretty good luck and some fast laps. He doesn't race mini sprints enough, but we thought about getting into that mini sprint world. And when you enter a sport with your kid, you want them to do well.
Right.
Well, the only way to do well now is you got to pony up the coins.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I was telling Trent he was 6 years old, so he doesn't know anything about it, but Yamaha was ahead of their time. Yamaha had a out of the box, what was going to be a dirt racer.
Yeah.
Now, this was pre-COVID. What year was that, Trent? 2016.
I just say they had them at Las Vegas for the Duel in the Desert. They had them. I remember them being displayed up there.
It was I would say to me, as a parent involved with it, it was a phenomenal idea.
Yeah.
I just think it came out at the wrong time. I think it was almost reintroduced right now.
Yeah.
Because even a guy like me, you know, I thought, you know, you kidded around, hey, I came out of retirement, you know, like Brett Favre, grand opening, grand closing,
right,
all on the same day. But, you know, if I was to get into something, that would almost, at my age, kind of, let me look at this, because the junkyard builds are almost impossible. 30 years ago, I've been very fortunate. I had buddy Brian Stipe. He always did fabricating for me. He was phenomenal at it. He's kind of the last of the Mohicans as far as you would call it home built. Of course,
right.
Everybody's in a little shop, but you know, he's the last of the Mohicans of a first class home built race car.
Yeah.
But there's not too many of those guys anymore. The old welders, they're getting tired. The fitters, they're getting tired. So when we get into store bought, we have to say, okay, what is store bought? So if I was to look at a kid out of the grandstands, so, you know, Trent, you invited a bunch of your friends to the races. And what was some of the reasons none of them, I guess I can give you the mic, but what was some of the reason none of them, like, we couldn't get any of them interested?
Well, some kids, they just like weren't like either mentally prepared or the parents didn't want them to because it was expensive.
And that's kind of, you know, when I say kind of, like, Trent would like let some of his buddies ride some of his other go-karts, and they would be scared.
Yeah.
You know, they would be scared, but then if you told them to suit up in some pads, and here comes this corn-fed boy gonna run at you at 12 miles an hour to level you and give you a concussion because they didn't know any different, all of a sudden that seemed like a good idea.
Right. Yeah.
It's like it's kind of interesting. But, you know, as far as getting the kids into the sport, myself included, I'm part of the problem. You know, I try to help out as many kids as I can. You know, I've helped out, you know, William, you know, some other kids that need help. If somebody needs parts,
sure.
I just give them to them.
Right.
It would be nice if some more would start, you know, maybe looking into that area, because we're getting old, Lee.
Yeah.
And I'm not old, but, you know, I'm 50. I say I still got 25 good years left in the tank.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was 25, and that seemed like yesterday. So tomorrow,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm 75.
Yeah.
And I know that, but for Trent, and to keep the sport alive and keep it thriving, we got to figure something out. And I don't know what that actually is. And me talking to you, talking to Trent, he came on the show. I was like, Trent, maybe you can give us your young kid perspective,
Right, yeah.
so us old guys can know what you're thinking. In fact, I'll give it to you. Why do you think it's so hard for kids?
Well, some of these kids, like where I'm different is if I wanted to race, he would make me go out and work in the shop and work on the cars. Some of these other kids, they don't really have to do all that. And also the parents, like not a lot of parents are like y'all, and they just don't want to spend all the money and put on all the work to do that for the kids and like let them have a good time.
But if a kid wanted to, okay, say a kid comes from a broken home and the kid comes to the track and he just falls in love with circle track racing and hot rodding, what do you think's, I mean, I know the money, and I guess also two-part question for you. What can he do? Does he just hang around the old guys until we tell him to go away, or does he hang around until we put him to work?
Well, honestly, I'd say hang around until y'all put them to work.
Okay. So with that being said, maybe as old guys, when we see that kid walking by, maybe we need to lasso him and say,
Right.
"Hey, what's up, buddy? Here, I'll give you a bottle of water. You help me scrape some mud."
Yeah.
Maybe that's a little bit on us. The kids that aren't, I guess, mechanically inclined, or let's just say, for lack of a better term, I hate to use this, a gamer. How can we get that gamer from not gaming so much to get into the sports? Or, I mean, what is the problem with the gamer? Why don't you think? Because there's a lot of iRacers. And here's something interesting. You and I didn't have iRacing.
Yeah.
There was a game on Atari called Pole Position.
Yep.
And if you put your quarter in it, you could spin the wheel and cut the corner as fast as you
I thought you were talking about the old 2600 that had the paddle.
Oh, yeah.
And it had a Indy 500 game on there, and you could run an ice track oval, and you just go down one end, turn the car at 180 degrees, and it would go around and go back, and that was how you got by.
The old Atari 2600.
Yeah.
But for a gamer, how can we get the gamer off of the couch? Like, why doesn't the iRacer want to turn it into a reality? I mean, there's a couple, but it's few and far between. What do you think the problem is with the average iRacer to get him to come on board and do it for real?
Well, some of them, a lot of them are too lazy. And I mean, I'll be honest on here. I went through a phase to where I was too lazy at some point, but I've worked through that. And most of these like gamers and iRacers, they just don't want to put in the work. I mean, you'll be playing iRacing and I'll play it sometimes too, but if you crash, you can just reset.
Yeah.
Real life, you can't do that. So like they wreck in a real car, they'll be like, I don't want to do this anymore, and they'll hang it up.
Yeah, and that he's got a solid point. The reset button on the real deal isn't as easy.
And that's what I'll tell you. So when we sold the mini dwarf, that was like the kids' deal, and Logan was the only one I had at the time. What are we going to do now? And I thought about buying an iRacing rig with it, but I went ahead, and this is in no way any better financial decision, but I bought RC cars for us to go racing with.
We've done.
And that was exactly my thing with those. Was I wanted him to have to repair what he broke when he wrecked it. And by the end of doing that, he could pull the little transmissions apart, and which they don't change gears, but I mean the little gearboxes apart and all that, and put it all back together. And like I'd be out racing my class and come back, and he'd be fixing his, and I was happy with that. That was happy for that. But could get insanely expensive too.
Well, we had a stint with the RC cars. We still got them. We thought, the hardest part about an RC car is You buy it, and it's less than 5 cents on the dollar when you go to sell it.
Yep.
So you might as well just keep it. And when we moved, we had a bunch of RC car stuff because kind of COVID came, and we were like, hey, let's play with these and do all that. But there was a box stock class, and Trent was getting outrun, and I was like, man, this is a brand new motor, and had some buddies that says, oh, well, you got to take the motor out of the car. You got to run it. While it's running, you got to dunk it in water
Yep.
and season. I was like, wait.
Are you guys running slashes?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I got one right up there.
Yeah. So anyway, so it caught me off. I was like, oh my goodness, and it's like one thing after another. Then take the tires, and cut a few little blocks off that. I was like, what happened to being out of the box? We just wanted out of the box. So when I bring up that Yamaha R1 type racer, it was out of the box. And I think, this is just me talking, I think one of the solutions is, and I know it sounds crazy, people hate the claim.
I don't. I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah. Well,
if it will be a realistic price.
Right.
I mean.
Well, if you win the SuperTech 600 both nights, you lose your stuff.
Right.
But
yeah. And I'll be sad, but I mean, whoever gets that whole thing is whatever.
They might call you back and say, hey, you want it back?
Yeah.
But so with that being said, I think the only solution is eventually somebody comes out with a kind of a box stock racer, but the claim is almost 95% of a new one. Yep. So it keeps that checks and balances. Yep. I know that sounds crazy, but we talk about the cost of things. When I went to the track first time in '85, a pit pass was $15. Okay. A pit pass is $35.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more than doubled, whatever but in comparison to entertainment, a movie ticket was $2.
Yeah.
Now it's $6 or $8. So theoretically, nobody wants to hear this, but should pit passes be $65?
Right.
Comparatively, with that being said, if pit passes were $65, if different things cost different more, then the purses would be more. But no one wants to talk about that aspect of it, and that's the tough part.
Yeah.
So when you look at everything as a whole, I think an affordable race car with a claim will be what it takes to help get these kids back. Because I had a buddy, that started racing sprint cars in his 60s. It's kind of not quite a bucket list thing, but he's like, hey, he ran into it real quick. Well, I got the car. Now I need sprints. Well, now I got spare parts. Now I need a place to put them. Well, my trailer is getting awful full now that I'm hauling spare parts, a four-wheeler.
Mm-hmm.
So everything just keeps growing.
Yep.
And, I actually wanted to have, I had a concept for a race. The SuperTech 600 is enough for me. So if anybody wants to take this, I didn't run. But I thought it would be really cool to get a trailer sponsor, and have an open trailer 50. But here's the kick. The trailer company will put a 235, 75, 15, 5-on-5, and that's what you got to run on the left rear. Every modified or every factory stock will have a 235 and find a trailer and just do something to where it takes all of this off. I wanted to have a race where, all right, we're gonna pull left front, left rear, right rear out of the hat. All right, that's the shock you remove from the car altogether tonight.
Yeah.
Just to spice it up a little bit, because these kids, Trent can attest, with this sprint car, the shock game, you can tell them it's intense. The shocks, everything has to be perfect. I mean, I didn't get mad, but tell them about your worst sprint car race. What happened? You went from what to what?
So I started third, and usually we get like a little pace lap to warm up. I spun it out before we even went green. Then, I fall back, and then bounce off the wall. Well, I ended up going 3rd to 13th. Like I plain out just sucked in that race.
But he evaluated, and this is the hard part. There's racing. How much would you say it's mental?
Probably about 65, 70% of it.
And that's pretty intense when we're in a era of, I would call it mental crisis. Kids are breaking down with the mental toll that sports takes on them.
Yeah.
And when he said it's 65%, that's pretty intense. So when he knows, this is the first time I've heard him say 65%. So if the car is only mentally at 65%, physically it's this, and the car is an X amount percent, a lot of times he's going to blame himself.
Yeah.
But it could be the car. We might have missed it. We were very fortunate. We went down to Corpus, and I'm kind of new to the sprint car stuff, and I get it. And I use this analogy all the time with sprint cars. You can hold your hand out the window while you're going 65 miles an hour, and it can cut through the wind, and you can tilt it, nothing happens, tilt it, nothing happens, tilt it 1/2 a degree, and all of a sudden your hand goes shoo, and it lifts off. And I tell Trent all the time, these wings, they're critical on these sprint cars, along with the shocks, along with the torsion bars, if you really think about it, when your right front's coming off the ground, you're doing good. Well, actually, my old mind, your right front needs to be on the ground so we can turn good.
Yeah.
But it changes.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is the mental anguish that some of these. So we also have to give not the illusion, but we have to, I guess, coach these kids that it's okay to wreck.
Yeah.
But here's the caveat. When a kid wipes out the field, every guy out there, and a woman driver, but anybody between the ages of 30 and 60 say, that kid don't belong out here. Well, when we started racing, there was 6 or 7 guys doing donuts.
Yeah.
I'll give you a classic. You don't see it as much anymore, but when I started racing, there was always a crazy grape car. There was a 69er car. There was an 8-ball car.
Yeah.
And there was a car that had 180 headers out the door, shooting ducks, spinning out. These guys were there every single week.
Yep.
So when somebody new started out and sucked it up, they blended in. Now a new guy comes out, holy mackerel, all of a sudden he's the center of attention. What is he doing in this class? He's going to tear up my car.
And some people just can't they don't even want to risk taking that chance of looking bad in front of, there's so much social media now and everything. They're like, they don't even want to risk looking bad in a situation like that. I'm dumb. I'll try anything.
Right.
Man,
I am too.
I'm like, I think, like, I see somebody do something, there's, like, if one person's doing it, okay, maybe I can't do that if they're the only one that they hold a record at that. But if 10 people can do it, there's no reason I can't do it.
Right.
If that, I'm just like, I just need to educate myself, figure this out, and I can do whatever they're doing. If there's a few people that can do it, I can do it. And that's led me to look pretty dumb a lot of times, but in my mind, that's the way I am about things.
Right.
When I had raced 3-wheelers, my dad had done all that with me. He's kind of a thinker. We had a lot of stuff going on. But anyway, I won a lot of races doing that. But when I decided to race a stock car, it was just me and a buddy drinking beer in the grandstands watching races. And we're like, we ought to do this. And he goes, yeah, let's do it. We'll partner on a car or whatever. I went and bought a car and never, he's a friend, but he never even showed up at the races hardly, anymore.
Right.
And so I pulled in with my street stock the first year. Really, I only knew what I had read in Circle Track
Circle Track
magazine, and there was maybe it was Circle Track that had they had the street stock at Ventura, so that was a great thing. They had that series on in there, you know, and I'd read it, and that's how I showed up and went racing. Then on top of that, I'm going to tell you this: I went 10 years before I ever won a race. Right? Smarter people would have quit. Smarter people would have, but I enjoyed it and was doing it. And then all of a sudden, I got a ride with a guy. And I later asked him, I go, why did you pick me? There's all these guys that are winning races. And you wanted me to drive your race car. And he said, by now I have some guys helping me and whatever. He goes, you guys are just having great fun. You're always having fun. And that's what I want to do. He owned the car that I drive, the enduro car. He owned that. That's what I started driving. That's what I won my first race in. Won quite a few races with it after that. And that's just the thing. But I wasn't afraid to just keep racing and looking dumb and whatever. We were having a good time. My friends were having a good. One of my crew guys one time, I said something about not winning a race, and he's like, "What?" He goes, "All the years we raced, and we didn't win a race in the like." He never even realized we didn't even win a race, you know. Right. And we were just having fun.
Right.
And so there's got to be that aspect of it. You're like I say, you're looking. A lot of people don't want to be judged and are just afraid.
And that's big. And I would say, I don't know, you can elaborate on that, Trent, but I see it's different. You and I, we had peer pressure to be idiots.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, you know, we had peer pressure, you know, it was the kids now, it's the peer pressure isn't really to do stupid stuff, it's just that I don't know, it seems like you kids just rag on each other on social media or TikTok or whatever it is. It seems like y'all rag on each other to the point where some kids don't even want to come out of their room. And can you elaborate, like, why isn't other kids, I mean, you got a few, because, you know, I will say kids are as good as the company they keep to a point, but then sometimes Trent, you know, he kind of recluses because, you know, just not going to get on all the nonsense, but the kids don't pump you up. Like, if you win a race, you have a few that say, hey man, great job. But if you do bad, it gets reposted. Like, you know, what's that news? There's a new page out.
Worst drivers on track on Facebook.
So, you know, you get featured on that.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
But you know, do other kids your age pump each other up when they do good, or do they just like tearing you down?
I mean, not really. Whenever I won my first race, I mean, there was a few people that told me none of the fast guys were out there. They wrecked out, but, you know, I didn't let it get to me. But, yeah, a lot of kids, they don't get excited for each other anymore, and they just like to make themselves feel better by, like, degrading other people whenever they're doing better than them.
Well, I can say this because it was still a proud dad moment. When you won that night at the 600, you know, whether they wrecked out or whoever wrecked out, there were fast cars at the end and you were getting it done. So, you know, and that's speaking of, do you think kids should start off in the 600? I know this sounds crazy, but as silly as it sounds, the pace is slow in the beginning and then it picks up and it gets going and you get different track experiences, but then you hit on something in the beginning, it might be too mentally taxing and overwhelming. That would be an excellent starter event for a kid to really get their feet wet and learn a lot. But then, like you said, you know, in today's kids, do you think it's mentally too much?
Well, it really depends on the kid. Like, I know a few kids that they can go out there, they can have fun, they're mentally strong, but most of the kids in my generation, they wouldn't be able to do it. And Saturday night of the 600 at Devil's Bowl, you know, it was tough on me, and I was a little bit younger, and I just got in my head. But you know, a lot of these kids.
Well, let's talk about that because that was interesting. A little, open textbook here. We went to Iowa before that 600, and Trent was running about third or fourth. This is actually funny, and it's me and him and a buddy Raul. We went up there. Raul was scoring, I was crewing, and the way Iowa was laid out, you're far from the exit to where you got to watch. Well, Trent's doing great. I mean, he's running, making good laps, staying out of trouble. Well, he just pulls off. And I said, "Hey, Trent, what's going on?" He said, "Dad, it's squalling. The harder I run it, something is squalling under the hood." Well, he had never burned a right front to where it would start squalling and rubber. He had never, but that was an awesome deal. Yeah. He said, "Is temperature good or what?" "Yeah, that's fine. It just squalls. Something is loud." Well, in a dirt car, in a modified, it echoed tremendously through that, through the cockpit. But he learned what that was. You can't teach that.
No.
You can't teach that. But then we went to Devil's Bowl, and Friday he finished. What did you finish? He finished 8th on Friday. His first enduro ever at Devil's Bowl. That's a big track. There was, 100, I think 21 cars started, and to finish 8th was phenomenal. Well, Laney, the track got rough. Laney worked it and put some water on it. Oh, by the way, happy birthday, Laney. It's Laney's birthday, Devil's Bowl Speedway. That's why I wore the shirt. I was going to say, I got to tell Laney happy birthday. So happy birthday, Laney Edwards. But Saturday, the track was intense. I don't know if you remember that.
No.
It was hammer down. I mean, tacky. The speeds were insane.
What year was that?
It was 2 years ago. It was year before 105.
The year before 105.
Yeah, so I was up there.
Yeah, but it was tacky in the beginning, and pulling tear-offs, and it was insane. Well, Trent pulled off, and he said, "It's too much. I'm gonna wreck going those speeds."
Right.
But he had done. See, here's how getting into your head actually probably is a true testament, because he had done 70, I think, 1 laps, and it was just too much. It was too much, and he pulled in, and I said, the red came out, for the half, and I went down there. He was 60 laps. I said, "Are you sure?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay." But also knowing when your mental game isn't on point.
Yeah.
To, hey, take a break. I think that even affects some adults.
Yeah.
In dirt track racing.
Oh, yeah.
But also the kids, allowing them to take that break, because nowadays, if a parent spends this kind of money, you're racing, kid.
Yeah.
We're here.
Right.
We towed. We did all this. Well, that's a slippery slope too, because you're learning,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be different if it was a beat up bomber.
Yeah.
You bang it off the wall. We're from the days when we got an A-arm. We were excited. We looked at 2 things when we bought an A-arm out of the junkyard: if the bushings were cracked and if the ball joint felt tight.
Yep.
Because we didn't have to spin. It goes direct bolt on.
That's it. Yep.
But they don't. These dads now, it's like, "Man, I dropped $1,000 to get here. You're racing, kid.
Yeah.
What do you mean you don't?" And I think, like say, I don't know exactly what the true solution is, but I think us old timers understanding these kids. But I'll give it the other thing. Trent coming on this show, he's not Mr. Interviewer, are you?
Not all the time.
It's not his big thing.
Right.
But having an open, 16-year-olds don't talk about their feelings.
Right. Yeah.
They just don't. And in a world where everything happens so fast, I use this, Lee. I told Trent, I said, back in my day, when we had the presidential address, everybody, when the president came on 7 o'clock, you sat down,
Right.
you
Yes.
listened, everybody shut up, nobody said a word, you listened to the presidential address.
Yep.
Now it comes so fast through a tweet and rapid fire information. The president, and I get it. It's technology. You know, you're doing this show. You're way more technological savvy than me. I'm a little stuck in the mud in that department. He's way better at me. I have to hand him my phone and say, "Hey, turn this song off or whatever." My pocket will start playing music. Hey, get this off my phone. But you know, a kid talking about their feelings, us adults, we need to listen.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and I'm not saying, oh, we gotta, let's make it a big deal, but it is imperative to listen to these kids.
So Chris White, Chris?
Yes.
I would say no to starting a kid in the 600 now. The cars are way faster than the first were. I'm assuming first were, and they are built like tanks. They don't fold up. When it started, it kind of dangerous when cars got piled up. They started as stoggish race cars. Now they're full-on racing tanks and are fast.
Yeah, well, at the same time, and I see his point. The cars weigh 2,800.
Yeah.
Factory stocks weigh more than that. An eco stock weighs about 2,500. So when they say the cars are built like tanks, there's a little bit of an illusion because some of the bars just aren't covered up by a rubber nose piece.
Right.
So when you see that, you're like, whoa, but yeah, I thought it would be really neat, but you can't do this anymore. But I thought it'd be really neat to have an enduro with no front bumpers, no front fenders.
Yeah.
Like, all you could have is a radiator and a screen blocking it. But the problem is, in today's time, nobody can even do that. Like, you can't take it over to Buddy's race shop and say, "Hey, cut the bumper off, build me a loop, and put me a screen catcher and a piece of plastic in the front," like the old days.
One thing with me talking about that with the new guys or coming into that race, it's hard to pace yourself. It was at 105. That was my best one there. I run third to you on night one. But just like all these guys are driving by me midway, and I'm just like, and I had more car, right? I'm not sure that I had more tire. Turned out maybe I had a little bit, but I didn't know. And you're just watching guys just drive by you and drive by you. And that was what, like, at the end of the race, I couldn't hear good through the receiver. And I didn't know what was happening. And the guy in front of me took his helmet off. And I'm just like, okay, we must be done. And I just thought, of all time for there to be 25 fast cars here that finished this race, And I was surprised when they come and got me for third place because I just felt like people were driving by me the whole race. And I felt like, but I was driving a lot by that tire squall too. I could hear, I might be leaning on that a little much. And so we're just making laps. And people just drove by me.
But yeah, Chris has a good point. And at Rocket Raceway, we're gonna have a little text. Maybe that's an introduction to it. We used to have a thing in the Houston area called Thunder Bombers. And it was a neat deal. It was 100 laps. I think it paid $1,000 to win. Started all cars. I'm not saying tracks should have mini enduros, but almost a little bit of a run what you brung for people to just try stuff out. Kenneth Montgomery does a little rent a ride deal, which is great. But I feel for Kenneth because sometimes the mentality of a rent a race car is kind of like renting the truck from Home Depot. Let's see how overloaded we can load it up. So that's a slippery slope too on a rental racer. I know. I think Chamberlain does it down there at Texana with some Novas.
So, I did a video about this on TikTok. Okay, I come out of the horse industry. I was around horse racing a lot.
Okay.
They on a day's race card, say they're going to run 12 races. for that day, 12 horse races. They'll write 20 races, 22 races.
Okay.
And a lot of those they have different claim values for per race. Like and basically you have signed your horse over when you enter that race. And if somebody claims it, that paperwork comes out, because they're all registered and everything, comes out of the racing office and over to, so you basically put him for sale when you're moving into that race. And there's different values. Do you want to run him for 2,000? Do you want to run him for 10,000? Do you want to run him for 100,000? I mean, but you're going to get that caliber of horses in there with you. And on top of that, they have maiden races. If a horse has never won a race before, that's all a non-winners race. Non-winners of one, or non-winners of two, non-winners of three. And so that, I kind of look at that. Horse racing's been around for a long time.
Absolutely.
And it would be interesting to see it. Yeah. Okay, we're writing a $2,500 claim race for this whatever weekend. Just bring it, whatever you got, but bring your bill of sale that's signed and turn it in when you like, because that gets in
your head.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, it's for sale. If anybody, and in the horse industry, just as long as you have an owner's license of, that own horses within the state of Texas, say, or whatever, that race, you can claim. It's not within that race. It's anybody in the grandstands that has an owner's license can go pay the money, and that's their horse when they're done. And when it's done, there's an official that comes out and takes the horse. They used to snap a little ear tag looking thing, like cows have an ear tag on the bit, and they go in and do a urine test on it and all that stuff. But I mean, it's in your possession at the end of the race.
That would be a neat deal. That would be a neat concept. I wonder if you could also add the caveat, because so you let's just say you brought your car and it was a $10,000 car and you're entering that race, and then Trent wants to buy it.
Right.
So Trent buys your car for $10,000. What would be an interesting even caveat, because we got a few cheaters, is if Trent buys your car for $10,000 in that race and then says, okay, I'm going to put up $1,000 for an inspection, and it comes up illegal. If it comes up illegal, he doesn't have to buy it. You don't get your car back until you pay $5,000.
Yeah.
To hold their feet to the fire, because you'll get some daddy warbucks with tons of money that'll have the 383 decked out, but I see what you're saying also with a run what you brung type deal. But for the lower ones, you can almost do it for, we had a deal with the Eco Stocks we started in Houston where it was an $1,800 claim. It was very successful. I mean, my buddy Brian Stipe, he built, I think, 32 of these front wheel drive Eco Stocks. We ran them on the asphalt, HMP, then Battleground. There's a few of them still. They still run. But, what we did is we found cars that were 150 horsepower, 130 to 155 horsepower. And those were the cars you had to pick from. So it was Malibu, Cavaliers, Chrysler LeBaron, the front wheel drive. It was those. But the problem is those cars are gone now. So it needs to be re-upped. But yeah, I see what you're saying. That could be a very good idea.
Yeah, and it's just, like I say, just something to look at, because horse racing's been around a long time. They've kind of got it figured out, and that's, they keep things close.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought process.
But that's been one of my things. And I also never mess with the LS engines until the enduro car, and I really like those things because I've never paid more than $500 for one yet. I put a $300 cam in it, and that's what we're running.
Right. And that's, we talked about the LS and the sprint car. We run a 305. In the 305, I get the point of the 305. I truly do. But for somebody just getting in, a 360, That's big money, and the 410s, of course, but the 305s have gotten very expensive. So I told Trent, I said, man, we ought to do an LS. But then everybody's like, we already got 4 sprint car classes. We don't need
Right,
another
yeah.
one. And up north, the LS sprint cars are really taking off.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
It is, and that's another thing is there's just so many classes of things. The modifieds around here to me are insane. Stacy would be like, "What class is this?" I'm like, "It's a modified."
Well, no, we got limited modifieds, then we got A mods and B mods,
mods.
but they got a C mod coming up.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, can't figure out what mod I really am. So the C mod is can't figure it out.
And then they have the eco mod here, and
so that's Trick can tell you. So bless his heart. You want to tell them about what I did to you with your first limited with no quick steer and all that good stuff? Bless it. You want me to tell it, or you want to tell it?
I can.
Go for it.
So after we were done with we're not really done, but my first big car was a limited, and it didn't have any quick steer. And what he would do is I'd go practice, and then whenever a race would come up, like at Texana, I would enter in E-mods and limiteds. So I'd roll out for limiteds, then
wait, you'd roll out for limiteds. Here's where he gets good on treaded tires. I mean, he had the A40s, the soft or the Hoosier H500s.
Yeah, okay.
So the limited, he had H500s. But then what happened when you went to the E-mod?
We changed it to slicks. And, it's completely different driving style. But I'd pull in, we would change them, do some stuff to the car, and then go right back out. I mean, it was a lot, but it was definitely fun, and I sometimes miss it.
Yeah. He actually would stay in the car because the deals, and I would have 4 tires mounted up. I'd have to take the spoiler off, take the roof off. But we would change it between races. Everybody says, why are you putting him in both classes? And he hit a huge growing spurt. Honestly, I thought he was going to stay 3 foot forever. And then all of a sudden he sprouted up to almost 6 foot or whatever. He's taller than me sometimes, but he didn't have any power. I mean, quick steer. And he said, he told me when he first started, because he first started when he was 12 running them. He said, Dad, it's just my arms are slapping. And I was like, what do you mean your arms are slapping? He goes, like they're slapping together. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, when I turn, I can't get my hand off before my other arm knocks it off. So he had these little T-Rex arms, and he was like, so the bad part about it, I had to have him moved up the seat high, and then he couldn't. So then I was like, I'm going to fix his wagon. So we had started, and this is probably the craziest thing I've ever done to my kid. We're talking, he said, Dad, I want to race something, maybe different. I want to try one of those sprint cars. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, they just cool. He just loves sprint cars because he ran a wing go-kart. Yeah. I was like, well, I don't know. He goes, what about a mini sprint? And we looked. I said, well, we'd probably do a 305 for what we can do a mini sprint. But in the limited, I did something. It's like, well, if you're going to start down a sprint car, you need some quick steer. He goes, can we make it faster? So, yeah, we can make it faster. So I put a 6-to-1 box on it with a 2-to-1 coupler. So it was quarter of a turn, lock, quarter of a turn, lock. Only problem is if the motor wasn't running, we were not turning it at all. Like it was a problem. Yeah. That was the only problem. But he was lock to lock, and he never moved. Well, then when he went out there, we called it. I was like, "What in the squiggle wheel is that?" Because he would go down the front straightaway, and it was just like twitching all over. He's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "You got to slow down your hands." So he slowed down his hands, and then when he got into the sprint car, it actually paid us dividends because he was already used to it. But yeah, that limited was something else with that. And the other crazy part though is I don't know why nobody else does that. Like
I have a buddy that knows it.
Oh, he runs the 3-to-1.
A friend of mine, Levi Kiefer, runs a 6-to-1 box with the 2 to
Yeah.
He's had a neck injury and stuff, and I don't know if maybe his shoulders don't move good too.
Gotcha.
I don't know how far that's all fused down there. I thought I killed him one night. He's a good friend, and we always had a deal kind of racing. It was just unspoken, but if I was rolling the high side, he always liked real tight cars and be down on the bottom, but coming out of the turn, and usually I'd give him a little tap and let him know, hey, I'm up here if I'm coming, and because he was just his neck and everything was fused. We were at a place called Chowchilla, and I thought I had a good enough run on him that he would see me before, and I never tapped him, and I got him tipped out toward the wall. And I thought, man, his neck's already broke, and I've killed him. I've killed him right now. So I backed off, let him get it gathered back up. We went on and raced. And when we got done, he was like, you didn't warn me. You didn't warn me. But, yeah, he runs
Well, and our late model was a 3.4 to 1. When I was running the late model, so I was like, let's try it. And I think he has a little bit of an itch to want to run a late model after watching his buddy Tyler Erb run, but we got to stick with one thing at a time.
Odds of getting a stock road course or a chicane enduro going at Rocket also. Make it pretty much stock like Crown Vics, 4-bangers, V6 cars, low entry fee, low pay, keep the big money out, and make it affordable. We're going to spend $2K, have a race ready car, do it 2 to 3 times a year, and draw in fans to watch. People like Jensen Destruction.
You're absolutely. That comment is spot on. There's one missing ingredient. Who is putting cages in Crown Vics?
Well, he's on an airplane right now.
Gotcha. But it gets tough because it's a good idea, and I wish, as silly as it sounds, I wish, if you had a Crown Vic, I hate to say this, but if somebody made a type of bolt-in kit and cage, they makes a great kit, but you still got to be a fabricator.
Yeah.
They just don't. Nothing is a true drop in, and until we get some more fabricators, kind of like machine shops, and then, unless you got somebody that knows how to tune and work on the ECM, and then make sure you pack that ECM with some spray foam, and then make sure you take the inertia switch out of the trunk so when you get rear-ended, it doesn't die. But yeah, it's a good idea. It's definitely a good idea.
Hey, Chris, you asked about who's putting cages in them. He said me. He said I built 3 this year.
Well, come on, Chris. We might have you lined up if something can go that way.
And they, at Bakersfield, at Mesa Marin, Kern County Raceway, Mesa Marin shut down. It's an asphalt track now. Now the Bakersfield Speedway is dirt behind it. But they had some cars, and I don't even know. They look kind of like modifieds. I don't know where they got them, but they got like 10 or a dozen of these cars, and they would have different. They had cops against the firemen. They would have rent them out from time to time and stuff like. But they were just track cars, and they all sat there, and they run on the Kern County Raceway is a half mile, big half maybe. I run an asphalt late model on one time. My one asphalt late model ride was there, but they run those cars on the Legends little track down in the middle, and it was always interesting. Like he's talking, lots of banging and beating, and I don't know who they had fixing them, but when they were done, they all just went over there and they got fixed by next week somehow. So, but that was a cool thing too, and maybe that's. Like you touched on it with Kenny Montgomery, maybe the track has a couple of rental cars or something, and
it gets to because these tracks they're spread pretty thin, just getting the show in. I often thought, and people, another class. What if we had a deal that you spec the gear in the rear end, you spec the carburetor, and you had a 5,000 RPM chip?
Yeah.
Like you spec a few things to where this person, this newcomer, can get in there. Heck, at 5,000 RPMs, we don't even have to balance the engine anymore.
Right. Yeah.
We don't have to have good valve springs. I mean, shitty valve springs will go to 5,000.
Run you a radial tire so you can't blow it up.
Call it the pizza cutter class.
That's
but
it.
Exactly, have something to where and people, oh well, that's yeah, but
Yeah, but you're right. There has to be something to start.
Right.
There has to be some division
and I use this. Trent has a phenomenal shock help with Earl at 41 shocks. He's got great help there. But and Earl will kill me for saying this, but even in that class, every time I've run a race, I've broken a shock. Trent broke a shock at the 600. He's broken 2 shocks in Iowa. At Solo, I think he broke every shock when it was over there in Kilgore. Not this last one. The last one was great. But what I was going to say is, you could almost take 2 shocks off. You get 2 shocks.
Mm-hmm.
Pick 2 corners.
Yeah.
Pick 2 corners. Now, will it kill the handling of the car? A little.
Yeah.
But does it need to handle that great?
Right.
That's not what this is about. This is about learning to slide around and learning how to drive a shitty handling car.
I've won in that old car out there without a left rear shock. And my buddy Jimmy Irwin, his brother Billy gets on here sometimes, but Jimmy was running second to me, and he said he saw it drop and start dangling, and he was like, I was just licking my chops, like, he's done, and he's like, and I still couldn't catch it.
Right.
And it was in the early days of the really hard compression shocks. So it should have affected it more than, like, in my mind, more than it did. Like, I didn't even know it was gone, And so, because I got to drive several different cars, and I had that one shock that I owned, and that was just the left rear shock that came with me. I had, like, my helmet, driving suit, and this shock, and we're putting that on the left rear, and that was. But now there's so much more intense shocks.
Man, I tell you what, that shock game is intense for sure.
So this is Skinny. He'll be doing our cooking up there and he says KCRP is starting the Crown Vic class, and he did exhaust on 2 of the MMI cars for it. So yeah, I think the Crown Vic deal is pretty neat.
But we are entering a situation where you have to look at the long game.
Mm-hmm.
And how old are Crown Vics now? Between the police and then the cop episodes where they're chasing them, and heaven forbid, Grandma Pearl still has a few Crown Vics in her garage with 35,000 miles, pristine. But those are getting, we want Grandma Pearl to live forever, so we don't have to turn her Crown Vicky into a race car. But they're even getting harder to find.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate part. And then you got some of these young techs. A kid out of school, he doesn't know how to work on a Crown Vic. Like me, there's certain things I can work on very well, and there's certain things I don't have a clue.
The LS was a huge learning curve. Luckily, I had Chris over there at Precision Car Care. That was a huge learning curve for us. The first time we fired it up, it ran for half a second. Like, it was obviously firing and shutting itself down. It wasn't spitting and sputtering out of fuel like it would fire and done, and that's it. We didn't even know about the anti-theft in them and all of that.
Right.
So we had to go through and take all that out. And him and I are both. He's younger than me, but just on the computer scouring YouTube videos and everything else, but we got it running, and it runs pretty decent now, and all that. And they're fun. I am kind of a computer guy, so that's been a fun thing for me, I was asking ChatGPT the other day about tuning it, because I saw a video where guys were using that to tune, and so it's like, load your tune in here and let me look at it, and then it comes, it's like, what octane gas are you running? I'm like, well, you know, it's about half 110 and half pump gas. And okay, well, yeah, you can probably go straight up on your timing straight across the board, you know, and get a little more bottom end out of it. And I'm just like, that's just crazy, you know.
Yeah. Well, but you does that work when you ask TikTok for something? Like, you know, I got my daughter and I love her to death, you know, but she was, hey, Dad, can you do this? I saw it on TikTok. Like, no,
yeah,
you know, dad's not a TikTok repairman, but it looks like I'm gonna have to get that way here before long.
yeah. I put a lot of videos on TikTok. That's probably the best social media that I have going is
Gotcha.
my TikTok account.
Well, that TikTok, it gets a little confusing for me because sometimes I go down a rabbit hole watching TikToks,
Yes.
and then I'm like, and then Trent says, "Oh well," and I'll say, "Hey Trent, did you see this?" He's like, "Dad, that's not real." Well,
Yeah.
my 50-year-old fuzzy eyes, it looked real.
You know, okay, this is completely non-racing related. We had little Riker that's going to be 4 real soon in there, and he wants to sit and watch monster trucks or whatever. So we're going through that, and then he wanted to watch monkeys for whatever reason. And you talk about it, we get to watching monkeys, and it gets really like I had to turn it off because it got really foul because they have no laws, right? There's no
right.
there's no age limit. There's no, and like a big one would just take a little one, and I'm going to say use it, and then just fling it. And I was like, holy cow, like that's pretty rough to be on it. And then you get that on your algorithm too, so you got to like try and delete them and whatever, swipe by them fast so they don't quit. It was rough.
Yeah, my TikToks are drill bits that never dull.
Yeah,
you know, that's I Google stuff like that. Give me a drill bit. In fact, I look like a crackhead or what are these track marks? I've been drilling in the purlins, and since we moved, my long sleeve shirts are packed away, so I'm doing it in a short sleeve shirt. And I got all the drill shavings falling on my sweaty arms. So yeah.
Well, and I'm just glad you're here because I did see his post that you had a little hell on the ladder.
Hey, if Zach Heron, if you're watching your piece of shit ladder, I appreciate you loaning it. Him and his dad were helping me do some stuff, and his dad said, "Well, that's Zach's ladder." I was like, "Well, I appreciate him leaving it over here, but it's got some angle iron hook to the side of it. It's fiberglass. The hinges aren't tight, and you can tell the story if you want, but you want to tell it?
I guess I will. So he was running some wire through, and I guess he moved or something, moved wrong, and he slipped. Well, somehow, with his age, he managed to catch on to one of the beams, and it was dusty and he was sweaty, so that made some mud, some slick stuff, and he's hanging on. And split second later, he falls again. So technically, he fell 2 times.
Oh, twice.
Yeah, I splatted. But I will give him credit. He did jump over there and cushion and try to catch me because, anyway, we're going to be doing some insulation. So I got the breaker box. It's laying on the ground, like it's off of the wall and it's laying on the ground. And that's happened to be right where I fall on top of the breaker box. But yeah, he did help save me. But then, he learned a few extra curse words. It wasn't that he learned new curse words. He just learned how to combine them in a fashion that he probably hadn't heard before. Through fiberglass and other stuff in there, as adjectives. But it was pretty good stuff.
That's when you know you're starting to age, when people gasp when you fall instead of laugh right away.
So when I met Heather, I was about 25 pounds lighter, so she's put 25 pounds on me, and I thought that it would be cushion, but I also realized that the more you weigh, the faster you fall. So like, do you sacrifice the cushion for gravity?
Yeah.
The jury's still out.
Yeah.
But I think if I was 25 pounds lighter, I might have been able to hang on to the beam. So I blame Heather.
Well, guys, Chris right there, I missed that. He said he has six rental Crown Vics at HMP.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, I know Owen was doing a deal where I think Billy went out there and ran the Crown Vic. So
Yeah.
that's an awesome deal they're doing out there. And I think the Crown Vics will surprise you. Like Billy, boiled the tire. I watched something where I was like, Billy, like, do you not hear it? And then when you start racing in your own smoke,
Right.
Billy, you're racing in your own smoke. Look around. You don't see no other cars.
Yeah.
But anyway, no, it was funny. It was impressive.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if it was a Kumo, a Cooper Cobra, an old Road Hugger. I don't know what they had on there, but it lasted. I think it didn't pop, did it?
No, not that I know of.
So yeah, that's.
I got to test one of our hobby stocks, Nova. We were going to race it on a small asphalt track there in just out of Bakersfield, and so we went and tested it and didn't change a whole lot on it. We were pretty good with it, just right out of the box, even with our dirt set up on it. And that was, we went out 3 or 4 sessions, and the last session of the day, I just dumped it down into both turns and give them a show, going around there. And it was pretty fun because everybody was clapping and all that kind of stuff. But it was a neat deal. And then I didn't get to race it there for whatever reason. But anyway.
Well, cool deal. So, well, I guess one of the major takeaways from your show, and I appreciate you having us on. Like I say, he's not, but the one major takeaway is for dads out there, or even if your kid has something to say, try to listen without having such a biased opinion.
Yeah.
And if you're gonna put pressure on your kid, make sure they're able to handle it. Just because you did, we come from a different era. We sparks hit us in the face with no safety glasses era, and it's a different time.
And there's definitely a difference between rooting them on, cheering them on, because I'll tell you, I might have told you last time that my son got into cage fighting for just a little bit.
Okay.
And so in one of his training fights, he ended up with a guy that was about 10 years older than him, and I think 15 pounds heavier or something, and was just getting smoked in there, and I'm like, and I'm trying to cheer him on. I'm like, come on, because he would get out and run miles. I'm like, you got wind, son. You got wind. Come on. But he was just getting smoked in that deal. And I'm like, anytime you want to quit, you're welcome to step out of that deal, But he stayed there till it was done. But that was crazy to watch.
I tell Trent, sometimes you got to fight like you're the third monkey on the ramp of Noah's Ark, and it's starting to rain.
Yeah.
So, but and that's one thing he does. He does train physically. I'll give him that for these enduros. But just in general, I hope that us older guys and anybody watching your show, when you see that kid walking, whether it's with a mom, a dad, pull them over. Let them work on your car. Let them help out. Let them do a little bit.
This is gonna, and the show's getting long, but we can run it however long we want to. One thing I asked a long time ago, because I took the old car out back to, and that guy had a backup car for me. We had 2 of them that looked just alike, and my boss's son was having show and tell, and my boss asked me to take a car to his school. Mm-hmm. And so we ended up taking them both, and several classes come out. I think we had one kid that didn't want to get in it. Me and one of my crew guys lifted every kid in and out. And in this day and age, I might not even do that because you're afraid to touch the kid. any kids.
Right, you're right.
But we lifted. We were both sore the next day. But I got to thinking after that, I'm like, when do kids start hating race cars? Like, what? We had one kid that didn't want to get in that race car, in second grade. And then you got, obviously you go to the old folks home and they're going to be mad, they're loud, and just, where is the range in there that we lose them all? Right.
It's definitely, like Trent said, it's a lot of work. And maybe kids are scared of work. You got anything you want to say in closing to anybody watching, the young group or anything?
Well, I'll say something to one young guy I know. Like you said, happy birthday, Lanny.
There you go. Awesome stuff.
Young guys, get your cars together, come out and watch, introduce yourself to somebody.
Absolutely.
Most racers, even if they don't get along racer per racer, like most racers are pretty good, I think, about helping young people.
Right.
You know.
Right. Well, like I say, come out of that enclosed trailer and grab them kids up and let them help you.
So Billy, he says he didn't have to ask his sons if they wanted to race and work on cars. They wanted it 100%. But I believe that.
Well, that's because they thought they were always better than Bill. They wanted to show you. They had to prove it.
Right.
I'll see you tomorrow morning, by the way.
So yeah, thank you all. I missed out. I didn't get too many sponsors. We'll double up next time or something. We're gonna call it good. Thank you guys for coming over and sitting in while he's on the plane.
Well, he'll be back, so I'll be one of the long-time listener, first-time caller.
Yeah.
I'll get in next week.
Heck yeah! All right, so I'm gonna get this out.